Shalom and welcome everyone to the ICEJ webinar series. I'm David Parsons, the Vice President and Senior Spokesman for the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem, coming to you from our Jerusalem headquarters. We're at about day 109, I believe, or so of Israel's war with Hamas and radical terrorism, not only in Gaza, but in Judea, Samaria, Hezbollah in the north, and we've been really trying to keep up with all the developments, all the events. But we're going to focus today on a particular issue, which I think is very, very critical to why every generation comes up having to fight war again between Israel, the Palestinians, and Israel and some of the other Arab and Muslim countries. And it has to do with teaching peace. Our question is, will the Palestinians themselves ever teach peace to their people? And to help us with this topic, Itamar Marcus. He is the founder and director of Palestinian Media Watch, which they follow the Palestinian newspapers, the Palestinian television, radio, speeches, whatever, Palestinian Authority officials, Fatah, even Hamas, all the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza around the world, and really providing a very, very valuable service. And they have been tracking this particular question for, I guess, around 2 decades, Itamar. First of all, good to see you.
Great. Thank you very much, David, for inviting me.
Okay, and Palestinian Media Watch, I think it started in the middle of Oslo, correct? So it's 25, all gone on 30 years now.
25 years, yeah, just about.
Okay, and to many people, you're known as Palestinian Media Watch, PMW, but your website is palwatch.org, right?
Correct.
So just so everyone from the start, if you want to find out more, and we really encourage you to go to their website, palwatch.org. But Itamar, good to see you, and thank you for helping us unpack this important topic. It's really macabre how it's turning out now. The international community is applying a lot of pressure on Israel to go ahead and commit to a Palestinian state. It may be down the road, but we want a firm commitment, irreversible, a framework and a timetable in order to get the Israeli hostages back out of Gaza. It's really just outrageous. And it ignores not only that Hamas rejects the two-state solution violently, but the Palestinian Authority and Fatah have never really accepted the two-state solution as most of us understand it, because they add the right of return, which means it equals a one-state solution. They've never accepted the existence of Israel in its territory. I mean, is this correct?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. And since we're talking a little bit around focus and education, I can just tell you that Palestinians have been brought up since the early days of the Palestinian Authority to see the entire process with Israel as leading to Israel's eventual disappearance and Palestine from the river to the sea. We released a report last year on a Fatah educational magazine called Wa'id, where we went back 8 years, studied every message in all of the issues for 8 years back. There was not even one hint of recognition of Israel's existence or right to exist. The messages, the fundamental ideology that the Palestinians teach their children, and there are a couple of points. The first one is that there's an ancient Palestinian people that's existed for 5,000 years in what we know as the land of Israel, what they're saying is the land of Palestine. 2, the Jewish people never had a history in the land of Israel. All the biblical stories, if they're true, happened in other places. In Yemen, they didn't happen here, so that there was never a Jewish presence. 3, every archaeological find that Israel claims, all the coins that Israel has found with Hebrew script, all of those things are planted by Israelis. They're planted by Israelis to create a history. And therefore, and the final thing is, there have been numerous invaders of this so-called Palestinian people. The Romans invaded the Palestinians, the Greeks did, the Persians did, the Hebrews did, the Egyptians, they all invaded Palestine. All were defeated and expelled by the Palestinians. And eventually the Zionist enemy will be expelled as well. So this is how a Palestinian child grows up, in this completely distorted worldview. But the bottom line is that Israel has no right to exist and eventually won't exist, because we are invaders like all the other invaders. An incredible line in one of these books says that the precedent for what's going to happen here with Israelis is what happened to the French in Algeria. And then they write, just like every single Frenchman left Algeria, so too every single Jew will leave Palestine. And what's also interesting, they highlight this, all the pages are in black, and that final sentence, every Jew will leave Palestine, they actually printed in red in a large font. This is the Palestinian world. And these are the people that the United States and other countries want Israel to give over to rule Gaza. It was the Palestinian Authority messages that created the power of Hamas. Children who've grown up with these messages, when they reach 16, 17, 18, they say, well, Hamas is doing it. The PA is just preaching it. Let's go to Hamas. And then Hamas has all this power because it's based on the education of the PA. The PA inadvertently created an organization, a terror organization, even more powerful than they were.
Yeah. So you did an 8-year study. You monitor Palestinian newspapers, TV, radio, but also school books, education system, and children's program. You said you do an 8-year study and not one mention of at least trying to encourage Palestinian children to one day live at peace with the Jews.
Right. This was the Wad magazine. It's the educational magazine that's produced officially by the Fatah organization. They give it out in all their youth groups to children. They give it out in the Palestinian schools. We have pictures of principals giving it out. So it tells us what they really mean, what they really believe, and what they really believe and what they've told their people is that we have no right to be here. I'll give you another example. In this same educational magazine, there's a question: why did the Palestinians reject the recommendation of the United Nations in 1947 to partition Palestine? So they answer, how could we accept partition? We've been here for thousands of years on our land, and they, the Jews, no history, not them, not their ancestors, not their grandparents or their great-grandparents. They have no history here. So that's what the Palestinian child goes up. He grows up with the feeling of victimhood, and this is so important. A victim who has his land stolen, and therefore he has a right to fight and to kill and to murder in order to get his land back. This is the Palestinian ideology. Teach your kids they're victims, make them angry, and pretend that Israel deserves anything that they can do to them.
Yeah, as if they have the moral standing of the French resistance in World War II. Yeah.
Exactly.
Now, different scholars on anti-Semitism say there's religious anti-Semitism. This is say Islamic hatred of the Jews. That's Hamas. I want you to tell us a little what the PA itself, Fatah, and the Palestinian Authority do on that. There's racial anti-Semitism, which the Nazis championed, their genocide based on Darwinian theories. And then there's conspiratorial anti-Semitism. The Western imperialism came and planted Israel as a cancer. They stole our land. Which of these three is the PA majoring on, and how, and where would you fit some of these? Give us examples of them.
Yeah, well, the Palestinian Authority anti-Semitism includes major parts of all of those different anti-Semitisms. Yeah. And I'll give you a little overview. Let's start with their political anti-Semitism, their nationalistic anti-Semitism. Yeah. they had to explain to their people, since the Jews have no history in the land, why would Jews leave the United States, European countries, France, you name it, England? Why would they all pick up and go to Israel if they have no history? Their answer is the Jews have been a detriment on every country where they've been throughout history. Abbas said this a couple of years ago. He said that this is Mahmoud Abbas, head of the PA, said on TV, he said the Jews have been massacred every 15 or so years since the 11th century, right through the Holocaust. And then he says, why did this happen? It didn't happen because they're Jews. It happened because of their social role. They were taking usury and other things in their social role, etc. The Jews brought all these massacres on themselves. He talks about there was a scholar on television, a Palestinian scholar, at the beginning of 2023. Palestinian Authority broadcast this interview 3 times. And what did he say? He said, we have to understand why the Jewish state exists. He said, the Jews are racist, they're evil, everybody hates the Jews, and therefore, in order to solve their Jewish problem, they stole Palestine and dumped the Jews in Palestine, stole it from the Palestinians. This is all false, of course, it's all lies. But what it tells the Palestinians is, not only are we the ones hating the Jews, everyone hates the Jews. Everyone hates the Jews, and everybody fought the Jews, and we're the ones who are suffering now. Child said on TV once, explaining this ideology, says they all wanted to get rid of the Jews, and now we're suffering from this cancer. Okay, so that's the first level of Palestinian anti-Semitism. Jews are evil, everyone hates them, they dumped them in Palestine, and therefore we have a right to throw them back. There was an amazing statement of this 3 weeks into the war in Gaza, after Israel had already started its counterattack. And also there was a lot of sympathy to Israel at the beginning of the war. On TV, a Palestinian commentator said, we have to understand why all these world leaders are coming to express sympathy with the state of Israel. After all, we all know who they are. And his answer was amazing. He said they all succeeded in getting rid of this human waste, the Jews, the human waste. They're afraid if Israel's successful, the Jews will, if the Palestinians are successful in their war against Israel, the Jews will do reverse migration and return to their countries. And they don't want the human waste to return to them. That is why foreign countries support Israel, so that the human waste won't return. So this is their political. Now, they also have a religious anti-Semitism, which is almost identical to Hamas. And I'll give you just one proof of this, is this 2 weeks after October 7th, when it came time for the Friday sermons, the Ministry of Religion, the Palestinian Authority Ministry of Religion, published its weekly talking points. One of the talking points, 2 weeks after October 7th, was that the Palestinian imams should teach in all the mosques in the PA a particular source in Islam. It's called a hadith that goes as follows. This is part of Islamic law. The hour of resurrection won't come until Muslims fight the Jews and kill them. Jews will hide behind rocks and trees, which will say, Muslim, servant of Allah, there's a Jew behind me, come and kill him. Now, teaching this 2 weeks after Jews were hiding behind trees at that festival, the music festival, they were hiding behind rocks, and Muslims were coming around and shooting them literally in the bushes, behind the trees, behind the rocks. The Palestinian Authority was telling its people that what happened on October 7th wasn't just Palestinian nationalism, it was a fulfillment of Islam. Killing Jews the way it happened 2 weeks ago, that horrific massacre, was fulfillment of Islam. Now, this isn't Hamas. This is the Palestinian Authority message. So all of this anti-Semitism, this vicious anti-Semitism that you described, the Palestinian Authority has adopted all of it, and the people have accepted all of it. And for that reason, October 7th happened. And for that reason, the Palestinian Authority population celebrated October 7th with over 75% supporting what happened and 98% in polls saying that they're proud of everything that happened.
Wow, this is very chilling. I didn't know this particular fact you're pointing out. I was going to ask you what has been the messaging of the Palestinian Authority since October 7th, but it's the Ministry of Religion within the Palestinian Authority that gave the instructions to the imams in the mosque.
Exactly. Every week they issue a talking points, 5 to 10 different talking points. This was one of the talking points for 2 weeks afterward. Muslims have the obligation to kill Jews and the destiny to kill Jews who are hiding behind rocks and trees till they bring about their extermination. This is the Palestinian Authority.
Yeah, this hadith is well known by most Muslims, and it's written in the Hamas charter. But I think even Yasser Arafat itself mentioned this hadith in his famous or infamous speech in the mosque in South Africa back in the 90s, right after he signed Oslo or something.
He didn't mention this hadith. What he mentioned was something else. When he spoke in the mosque right after the signing of the Oslo Accords, a lot of people were angry. Why did you make peace with the Jews? And what he did is he quoted something else from Islamic tradition. He says, my deal is just like Muhammad's deal
with the Quraysh tribe.
Yeah, and that was a temporary agreement called the Hudaybiyah agreement, signed in the place called Hudaybiyah. It was a 10-year peace treaty, which he violated after 2 years when he was strong enough. And that's what he said. He said, this is our peace treaty, which is just like Muhammad's. We can't get more. We're going to take what we can now. And when we're strong enough, we're going to destroy Israel. That was Yasser Arafat's message. And like every other message that Palestinian Media Watch has reported since then, the international community hears it and they just shrug it off. Oh, they don't really mean it. He's saying it for this reason. He's saying it for that reason. If only the international community was listening to everything that we translated and all of our warnings, not only when October 7th happened, but we could have had peace a long time ago. Unfortunately, their willingness to fund a terror organization called the Palestinian Authority, and I stress they are a terror organization by any real definition of terror organization. The international community, the United States, the Europeans, the EU, willingness to fund them with hundreds of millions of dollars, sometimes more than $1 billion a year, is the reason we don't have peace today.
Yeah, yeah. This just it gets more chilling. The Palestinian Authority, which the international community wants to go into Gaza instead of Hamas, it's much better a revitalized Palestinian Authority. They have used this same hadith that Hamas has used to inspire jihad, martyrdom, etc. And again, the people need to understand this hadith says that Judgment Day, the end of the age, it's not going to come until Muslims fight Jews. It's perpetual war between Muslims and Jews, and until a tribe of Jews defeats a tribe of Muslims. And I think even Arafat years ago preached martyrdom, and he preached, Hamas does it too. They identify the Palestinian people as that tribe of Muslims that has this prophetic role. They will be the ones who defeat the Jews and bring about Judgment Day.
Yes, we've heard this definitely from Palestinian Authority leaders. Mahmoud al-Habash, who's the top religious figure in the PA, he's Abbas's advisor on religion, and he's also head of the Sharia courts. He's talked a number of times about this, what's called the final battle, the final war, and he says that final war is the Palestinian war against the Jews to destroy them.
Yeah, and yeah, it's quite interesting, the mix of racial. You were talking about the Jews are evil. They used usury when they're out among the nations, therefore the nations hated them and wanted to get rid of them. That's sort of racial anti-Semitism, that the Jews are inherently evil and corrupt and just greedy and stuff. Then
let me add to that, David. Excuse me 1 second. You're absolutely right that it's racial. There was one sermon where it was played out precisely. He starts off by saying that the Jews were cursed by Allah in his sermon, and then he said, and he talked about all the different punishments the Jews are going to get, and then he said, how could Allah promise this about the Jews? What about maybe they'll, some Jews will be good? And his answer was, the Jews' evil is in their genes. It's passed on in inheritance from father to son. This is the combination of the religious and the racial. The Jewish evil cannot be fixed. Other people's evil can be fixed. They can all be subjugated under Islam. But Jews are so evil, they will never accept Islam. They will never accept Allah's rule. And therefore, and he ends that speech, therefore the Jews have to be exterminated.
Yeah.
So So this is Palestinian Authority, political anti-Semitism, racial anti-Semitism, and religious anti-Semitism all combined.
Yeah. And yeah, sometimes the lies and fabrications, they don't fit so neatly in one category. They sort of overlap into several. But yeah, I want to ask about the conspiratorial side, because I think this is one of the major areas that the Palestinian Authority itself has majored in. There's no Jewish connection, this historic revisionism, no Jewish connection to the land, to Jerusalem, to the Temple Mount, temple denial. The Jews have stolen our land. It's a conspiracy, like the protocols of the elders of Zion, sort of old Russian conspiratorial anti-Semitism. And Abbas is engaged in it himself, that the Zionists collaborated with the Nazis in order to kill Jews in Europe so they'd flee to Palestine.
Yes, and you mentioned the protocols of the Elders of Zion. In that lecture that was on Palestinian TV that I mentioned before, that PA TV broadcast 3 times, that same supposed Palestinian scholar who talked about the nations of the world created the state of Israel to get rid of the Jews because the Jews were so evil and everybody hated them. He said, why did they hate them? He gave all these reasons, and one of them was that he said the Jews are behaving exactly like it describes in the protocols of the elders of Zion. Literally, he quoted it as if it's an authentic document. The entire world is known for 100 years, and this is 2023. On official Palestinian TV, a Palestinian scholar saying the protocols of the elders of Zion, the Jewish plan to take over the world, is authentic. So this is what we're dealing with Palestinians. People are surprised the Palestinians hate Israelis so much. And I always tell them, when you present Israelis and Jews as people who threaten your very existence, who are so evil that just having them around is going to destroy you, then even good Palestinians feel justified in hating Israelis because they feel they must do it out of self-preservation. What's the irony is that the only ones who've ever helped the Palestinians in all the years, let's say since 1948, the only ones who really helped them was Israel. I call 1967, when Judea and Samaria and the Gaza Strip came under Israeli control, I call that till 1994, when we gave it to Yasser Arafat, that was the golden years for the Palestinians. The life expectancy went from 48 to 72 under Israel. Their economy in the 1970s was the 3rd fastest growing economy in the world. The houses, when we got to the Judea and Samaria, the majority of Palestinian homes, they weren't Palestinians yet. The majority of Jordanian Arabs in Judea and Samaria did not have electricity, gas, and water in their homes. Under Israel, it went up to 90%. The golden age of growth. Also in education, we opened up 11 universities, I think it was, for them. Everything good that is in Judea and Samaria today, Israel built the foundations of. So the irony is, Israel did good for them. Jordan treated them like dirt. We built them up, and then along comes the Palestinian Authority, treats them miserably, takes away the freedoms that they had under Israel, and then all the suffering that they have under the PA convinces them that it's Israel and the Jews that are responsible for their suffering. So that's in a nutshell, what has happened to the story of the Palestinians, and it is just a horrific story because it didn't have to be this way.
Yeah, their own callous and corrupt leaders have robbed them of any really hope for a future. Your point, it's quite interesting. I remember about 2 months ago when Israel was trying to get into the Shifa hospital because they knew there were hostages there. There were Hamas terrorists there, maybe Hamas leaders. And Christiane Amanpour on CNN is interviewing some Israeli from the left, and she says, how do Israel know there's bunkers under the hospital? And he said, well, we built it. She says, oh, in shock. This lady who's supposed to know it all, she was shocked that Israel built at least expanded, I think, from 300 beds to almost 1,000 beds, Shifa Hospital, and built basements that can also serve as bunkers. But all the hospitals, all the universities, the death rate at birth, mortality rate, the life expectancy, everything improved for the Palestinians. I think, you and I first met way back at the start of Oslo when you started monitoring these things. How were they going to report Oslo in the media? How important is educating for peace, teaching that next generation of Palestinian children to live at peace with Israel and the Jews? How important? Because even Dennis Ross, one of the main Oslo peace processors, he later admitted that was one of their failures, ignoring the teaching of hatred to the next generation.
Well, it's absolutely critical. And I'll just give you one quote and the irony of it. In 2007, we did one of our many reports on Palestinian school books. And I turned to Hillary Clinton. I asked her if she would release it with me in the Senate. And we had a press conference together in the Senate after she went through and her staff went through all the material that we showed. And after I spoke in the Senate, she then got up and she said the Palestinians are profoundly poisoning the minds of their children. Now, the United States did nothing then. They continued funding. The Europeans, I presented the same material to them. They continued funding. The EU, they continued funding. Everyone continued funding. Along comes 2023, October 7th. We have an entire poisoned generation, to use Hillary Clinton's term. They're profoundly poisoning the minds of the children. Those people who went rushing into Israel, raping, molesting, shooting in places where everything that was done there, burning people alive, that was the poison generation. And we all knew it was coming. We, Palestinian Media Watch, warned about it. We told the international community, do something about it. So Hillary Clinton complained, but practical steps, nothing was done. The Europeans complained, practical steps, nothing was done. And when I spoke a few weeks ago in the European Parliament, and I showed them that video at the end, and I said, you knew this, and you did nothing. I said, and if you do nothing again now, or if you dare try to put the Palestinian Authority back into Gaza, in the next 15 or 20 years, we are going to have the same thing playing out again. So let's learn from the mistakes and do something completely new this time.
Yeah, I remember you had a real coup getting Hillary Clinton to stand beside you in exposing the hatred in Palestinian textbooks back then. And because she had once stood by Suha Arafat in Ramallah when Suha said Israel's poisoning our children, it was something maybe about poisoning women so they couldn't have children, or it was some real outrageous slander.
Yeah,
that was
she, like I said, she made the statement. Let's not forget that she was a senator in the state of New York.
Yes.
But she still made the statement. She made a very strong statement. She said they don't give them an education, they give them an indoctrination. So she understood the problem. But Congress, except for under Trump, Congress continued funding the Palestinian Authority, giving them hundreds of millions of dollars a year, knowing that this was going on. We didn't even mention the fact that the Palestinian Authority spends about $300 to $350 million a year rewarding terrorists, paying salaries to terrorists in prison, paying monthly stipends to the families of suicide bombers. This is the Palestinian Authority. Why would any ethical, moral, decent country want to fund a government that spends $350 million a year paying terrorists and their families? So it's something that boggles the mind. It defies explanation. It's like the international community, decided Palestinians have to be funded no matter how evil they are, even if they're clearly terrorists. We have to fund them. And I think, not in all cases, but in many cases, I think a lot of these countries who are funding them, they're funding them not because they care about the Palestinians, but because they just dislike Israel. dislike Jews,
Wow.
and this is their way of making life miserable for the Jews by funding those people who are making an expert profession out of killing Jews.
Yeah, it's the whole pay for slay policy. I think Trump even cut off money to the Palestinian Authority because of it, but they still kept paying them. People gave them money. They found money elsewhere to keep paying these welfare payments to killers. So the pressure has been growing on Israel to accept, to commit to a Palestinian state and to accept as the U.S. says, a revitalized Palestinian Authority to take over in Gaza. Prime Minister Netanyahu has pushed back on it. I thought the voice of Israeli President Isaac Herzog was very important. He went to the Davos summit, I think last week, and he said, look, no Israeli in their right mind is ready to talk about peace and a Palestinian state right now. You got to give us time to get over the trauma we've been through. And no Israelis trust the Palestinians anymore because they are teaching jihad to their children. And if the Palestinians were to start teaching at least coexistence with the Jews and all, would that finally, is that something Israelis would finally start trusting at least a peace process again?
If we would see, it would, it's a very general term, but the way you defined it, there would be a lot. They would have to have a lot of components. They would have to recognize Israel's history, recognize Israel's right to exist, teach their children that yes, Israelis have been here. They're not a Zionist implant. They're not a colonial implant. These are all the terms that they're learning today. You need. If Hillary Clinton said that the generation was poisoned, they need detoxification. We need a whole generation where they're taught values, ethics, learning to accept your
Exactly. It would take 20 years of Israelis seeing this on the other side of the line before they start trusting it all again.
Yeah, and before they could change the Palestinians, and before they could change the fact that 98% of a population, 98 said they were proud about everything that's going on, meaning October 7th and the war. That means we're not talking about a fringe. And that's what I think that's what the United States is trying to do by coming up with this line. Okay, let's have a two-state solution let's have a revitalized Palestinian Authority or a new Palestinian, reformed Palestinian Authority. It's a joke. It's a joke. When 98% of the Palestinian population is proud about massacring Jews, there is no one to talk to. We need a detoxification. I'd like to see something completely different running Gaza. No connection at all to any of the past political or military infrastructure. Israel has to be responsible militarily for everything that goes on there, and possibly the United States and Europe will be responsible for everything else, just like was done, by the way, to Nazi Germany after World War II. Nazi Germany after World War II, all the education, the whole structure, the whole culture, everything was run by Western powers. That's what has to happen to Gaza. And if it's successful after 10 or 15 years, maybe we can use that as a prototype for reforming the West Bank, Judea, Samaria as well.
Yeah, I think most Germans today would say we thank the West, the Allied countries that won, that they helped denazify our country and give us a true democracy with better values. Look, there's no question that October 7th, a big part of why it was launched then by Hamas was Israel was getting close to normalization with the Saudis. And the Abraham Accords with, let's say, at least with the United Arab Emirates, I think they're the best example. This is an example of Arabs, the very name Abraham Accords. They were accepting, this is an Arab people, an Arab country, accepting that the Jews are indigenous to the region, they're sons of Abraham like us, and starting to, the problem is that in normalization, it's the abnormal Arab mentality, believing all these lies and getting rid of it. It really has nothing to do with Israel. It's what they have to do themselves to normalize their own lives and their own thinking about Israel and the Jews and anyone else, because it extends to Western devious plans, whatever. But my question is, how did the Palestinian Authority present the Abraham Accords to their people? Here were Arabs accepting that the Jews were indigenous to the region and actually like brothers or cousins.
They were fuming. They were fuming, and we did a whole special report on this. They ripped into every leader. They cursed. They condemned. They had cartoons which said, "We're going to kick you in the dustpan of history." They had everything possible that you could say about them negatively was said. We did a special report, which we then passed on to through our contacts to the heads of these countries. And then they started ripping into the Palestinian Authority and condemning the Palestinian Authority and cutting off funding to the Palestinian Authority. And after a while, the Palestinian Authority decided that they better shut their mouths or they're going to lose one of their major sources of funding. And by the way, the Arab countries, as opposed to the Western countries who ignored all of the Palestinian hatred toward the West as well and just continued funding, the Arab countries taught them a quick lesson. They did cut off the funding. They didn't give it back right away. And the Palestinian Authority at least keeps their mouth shut regarding the Abraham Accords today. Not the Accords, but at least the countries that signed the Abraham Accords. They don't condemn them anymore. They don't talk about it anymore. They are accepting it more. If the international community, if the United States, if they'd all cut off funding, the first time they found out that the Palestinian school books were poisoning their minds, the first time they found out, and all of these are things they reported, the first time I went to their countries and showed them they were paying salaries to terrorists, had they all cut off their funding, there would be a different Palestinian Authority today, there'd be a different youth today, it would be a different world. But everybody who gives into hatred, who decides to ignore hatred, in the end, everybody pays for that hatred.
And as we saw, through the summer and especially leading up to the fall high holidays, there was a lot of expectancy of Israel normalizing relations with the Saudis. How was the Palestinian Authority explaining that to their people? Were they already trashing the Saudis, or had they learned the lesson with the Emiratis?
They learned their lesson. They had reports, more or less factual reports about whether it's imminent or it's not imminent. What they all talked about, they also talked about the fact that could be the Saudi condition that Israel had to accept the principle of a Palestinian state or create a Palestinian state. So in many respects, the Saudis were more sympathetic to the Palestinian Authority demands than the other countries were. I don't think that Hamas did this now because they wanted to stop the Saudis. Some people have made that up. We've been following Hamas. Hamas has been practicing to do this for years. They've been warning about this for years.
The timing of it might have been important, but they've been planning it for a long time.
They were planning it for a long time. The timing was, and in the last while it reached the point where they realized that every time they brought large numbers of their terrorists to the borders, one time Israel, months ago, Israel actually did call up some of their soldiers, and we were ready for them, and they didn't do anything. And the next time, and then finally Israel said, okay, this is just what they do. They're not really planning anything. And Israel decided to, the Israel intelligence tragically said, okay, so they're doing it. They've done it before. They'll do it again. It's just incredibly, it's surprising and tragic how the Israeli army intelligence was so tricked by this little game of creating a pretended threat and watching Israel's response. And when they did it enough times, then they realized Israel's not responding anymore. And they said, okay, we can do it now. And then they did it. So I think that was the issue more than it was the Saudis.
Yeah, they were trying to revive some of the march of return, marches up to the fence, and it was usually women and children, but men sort of hidden in and seeing what the Israeli response was. I think you're correct in that. Last question. Let's go with this. Do you see any real difference in the way that Hamas in Gaza, with free reign there, training, teaching the next generation to jihad and hate, and the Palestinian Authority out of Ramallah in the Judea, Samaria, the West Bank, is there any real difference in the way they have taught the Palestinians to hate and never accept, always reject any sort of peace with Israel?
There's no difference in the education. There's no difference in those messages that you just defined, to reject Israel under all circumstances, to see the process, the so-called peace process, as a stages process to Israel's destruction is a fundamental of Palestinian Authority ideology, and certainly Hamas, sees Israel's destruction as the final end game of any process that they have with Israel. The difference between Judea and Samaria and Gaza is that because we built this supposed wall around Gaza, and because there were no Jews living anymore in Gaza, we enabled them. We said, okay, let them do what they want on the other side of the wall. We don't care. And of course, you can't in today's world, or in any world, but certainly in today's world, you can't allow something like that to happen. In Judea and Samaria, because there was more terror, we have been much more active. In fact, people don't know this, but they should know it. We've arrested, since October 7th, 3,500 terrorists and terrorist supporters in Judea and Samaria. What we did, it was a wake-up call for the Israeli army that, all these people who are organizing their terror cells, we can't wait for them to do what they, in Judea and Samaria, attack Israeli cities across the Green Line, or cities in Judea and Samaria. We have to get to them now. So the difference between Gaza was really one of military ability. It wasn't one of education. They all teach the same hatred. They all would like to do the same thing. In Gaza, because there was a wall there, they were able. In Judea and Samaria, because we're going into their cities every night to check on what's going on, they have not been able, and they will not be able to do it.
Yeah. Okay. I think this is very important. I think the real kernel of what we're taking away here, that the international community says we should give the Palestinian Authority sovereignty and move them into Gaza to rule again. But this very critical component of educating the next generation for peace, future generations for peace with your neighbors, the Jewish neighbors, it's just not there. In fact, Hamas and Fatah is just as bad as Hamas, the Palestinian Authority. We thank you, Itamar Marcus, founder and president of Palestinian Media Watch.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and let's just hope that we can win this war as quickly as possible, with as few casualties as possible, and
the hostages back.
Get our hostages back, and create a future for all of our people who live on that border, and of course a better future for the Palestinians there as well, if they don't have either the Hamas or the PA ruling them.
All right. We wish you the best in all the work you do, especially impacting government leaders and decision makers, because I know you spend a lot of time in different parliaments and with different governments around the world trying to open eyes to the messaging of hate from the Palestinian Authority. Again, it's the Palestinian Media Watch, PMW for short, but their website is palwatch.org, palwatch.org, okay? We hope you enjoyed today's webinar. You can join us next week here 3 o'clock on Thursday for the next episode of our ICEJ webinar series, and make sure to join us at the top of the hour, 4 p.m. today, our daily global prayer gathering, pray with Christian leaders and Christians from all over the world, praying for Israel until this war, they can claim victory in this war every single day. God bless you from Jerusalem.
Thank you for joining us for this informative webinar. Be sure to subscribe to our social media channels or visit our website at icej.org for upcoming webinars and more ICEJ exclusive content.